Hi and welcome to Gender Speaker Live on this fabulous Thursday. And today, this is my first session during this 30-day challenge, having a live guest. And my guest today is Kat Burton, who was a BA captain. We're going to find out a lot more about that soon. Hi and welcome to the show, and I'm talking with ex-BA captain Kat Burton. So let's just bring Kat up on screen, and there we are, Kat. Welcome to Gender Speaker Live.
Hello, Ricky.
Right.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So I think the interesting thing is that when I set the PSA up, Professional Speaking Association, up in 1999 now, 21 years ago, I was... actually, I wasn't the only trans woman around, but I was in the closet. Nobody knew about me. We had Shelley Bridgman, who joined very early on. She was the first openly. Well, she wasn't even. I don't even think Shelley was openly trans then. She was in stealth. Back then, 20 years ago, it wasn't something easy to do. It only just that year become illegal for a company to sack someone for coming out. But you did that in a pretty big way, Kat, didn't you? I mean, you 45 years working with British Airways as a captain. At the end of it, a 777 captain. I'm just looking at that. That's one of the big long haul ones, is that? Or
that's right. Yep, 777 is pretty much the biggest airplane in British Airways fleet now. The 747's retired. I spent half my career flying 747s and then eventually jumped ship to the 777 for the last 7 years, simply because the writing was on the wall for the 747. It'll always be my first aviation love. I adore the airplane. I'm sad every time I see one going to be scrapped. But the 777 was the place to be for the route. And incidentally, it's Boeing, not Boeing.
Oh, I've spelled that wrong.
There's an E in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, it's always big. The bigger the letters, the less chance of spotting them. So I mean, you went literally into flying right from pretty much sort of out of college straight into flying. Was it? That was your first?
Well, not even college. I never went to university. I had a very brief year out when I finished my A levels, and then I was off up to Perth in Scotland as a trainee airline pilot. 13 months up there, then back to the airline, which at the time was Cambrian Airways, a small airline based in Cardiff and Liverpool, a Welsh-based airline. And that became one of the 4 component companies of British Airways when British Airways was formed. So I usually like to say British Airways joined me.
Oh, right. So you right at the very start of British Airways when it first...
Yeah. I came effective as a qualified airline pilot in November 1972, and British Airways was formed on the 1st of April 1974. Some would say a very appropriate date.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I'm going to ask a question now because I knew I was trans back when I was about the age of 7. I didn't know it was called transgender then because, in fact, Virginia Prince hadn't even coined the term transgender. It wasn't. You were transvestites or transsexuals. Yeah. That was it, and there were not very many of them. Yeah. April Ashley and Christine Jorgensen were the only names I knew. But were you aware of it? Well, right back when you were a child, was it?
So I became aware that such a thing existed. Again, April Ashley on the Simon D show, I believe, was probably my first exposure to somebody who had transitioned. Various others around about that time. I should have been aware, certainly by the age of 14, by puberty, that I was trans. I wasn't. I put it in a little lockbox and my brain marked it not open. It was just too scary to contemplate in those days. I dressed up with a school chum when we should have been doing homework, and my chum looked quite presentable, but I looked like what I was, a 14-year-old rugby playing second row forward in a frock. And I just recoiled in horror and said, I can't do this. This isn't me. And it was so many years later that I actually acknowledged. What I did was I inverted that gender identity confusion into a sexuality confusion. And for most of my life, I was actively attracted to gender variant women, I suppose we call them these days, transsexual, as we called them in those days, and had several long-term partners who were transgender through the years. But eventually something opened the box at the back of my brain, and I realized you only live once. You've only got the one chance to actually be yourself. And I couldn't hold it in any longer. And a couple of dressing sessions later, one with a good friend, and then one with a professional service up in London, who actually was also another very good friend, convinced me that I didn't have to look like a 14-year-old rugby playing schoolboy in a frock. But even at that stage, I was convinced I could never do it full time. I could never live in society openly, but at least I could have some form of outlet as a leisure cross-dresser. But very quickly, I came to the conclusion that it was actually a role play when I was pretending to be the old me to go to work. And the only time I was ever my true self was whenever I was home and me. Or actually never home. I never did go through that phase of dressing at home. I was always out and about whenever I was cat. It was obvious to me that was the real me, and the rest of it was just a role play. So eventually,
I was very locked into the financial services industry.
Never did.
Career gets in the way, doesn't it? I think what a lot of us do is to use our career as a way of keeping it in the box, isn't it? Because more
than that, Ricky, my career, if anything, was the perfect camouflage. So you find so many transgender women these days. When you get to know them, you find out they were in the SAS or Delta Force, or all sorts of macho professions, which are camouflage, which are basically to say, look, I'm a man, and I've got nothing to hide. Whereas in fact, you've got the fact that you're a woman to hide. And for me, certainly aviation fulfilled that role. When I joined British Airways, there were no female airline pilots in Britain. There was one third-level pilot who became an airline pilot a couple of years after I joined. But the first real recruitment of female pilots into British Airways happened about 12 years after I joined. We'd had a trainee 2 years after I joined who didn't do a job. They basically failed her entire course, so they wouldn't have to give them jobs. She eventually, 12 years later, got a job with British Airways as our first official female pilot. And then we got an influx of pilots when we took over British Caledonian. We had about a dozen or so of them. So they were the first dozen or so female pilots in British Airways.
Right.
What I like to say about my own situation is that in 1972, British Airways did have a woman pilot. They just didn't know it. But at the time, neither did I. So the simple fact of the matter is that when you look back on your life with hindsight, everything falls into place when you suddenly yourself. And, I've always been me. I've always been the same person. I present myself differently now. I think of myself, my identity differently now, but I was always the same person, really. And, that some things just never change. And for me, the opportunity to transition at work arose quite fortuitously. I was grounded by the Civil Aviation Authority for something entirely unconnected, a heart issue. They wanted some investigation of why I had a slightly unusual heart rhythm, and I was grounded for 4 months. And while I was grounded, I had no real reason to pretend not to be the real me. And I spoke to my line manager at British Airways and said, look, I'm grounded by the CAA, but I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm transgender. And she said, oh, we've never had a transgender pilot before. I'll have to look into this. What we'll have to do to bring you back as cat. So I said, well, I'll probably come back as the old me because I've only got 4 or 5 years to go till I retire. And she said, well, I'll look into it anyway. And 4 months later, I realized that if I tried to detransition effectively after 4 months of being the real me, I would have had severe mental health issues trying to go back, and I would never have passed the simulator checks to be stood back up as an online pilot. So I called her up and said, look, it's going to be Kat that comes back to work. And her response was truly priceless. She just said, oh, Kat, thank God for that. All the hard work I've done through the summer is not going to go to waste.
I think once you're out, it's very hard to. I know when I sort of made a decision, I was going to live for a month in 2001, and as me, and at the end of the month, I thought,
genie back in the box.
Yeah, you can't put it back in. I had people saying, "Oh no, please don't," because I just set up the PSA. I'd just been master of a Freemasons lodge. There was a whole load of things that just didn't gel with being a woman, but there was no way I could do it. I just said, "No, that's it. I'm out. We're coming." So now you're doing your senior flying instructor. Do you find that being transgender is a challenge there when people come to and find that their instructor is a trans woman?
It never even comes up, to be honest. I'm not sure how many of my students realize I'm trans, how many just think they've got a very senior woman instructor. It's not something that naturally comes up in conversation. It's not something I feel the need to tell everybody.
No.
It just isn't an issue. My employer knows. They are incredibly supportive. In fact, in the normal run of things, I'd be at work at this time of day. Today's a bad weather day anyway, so it's not really an issue, but they give me a huge freedom to roster myself around other commitments to the diversity field, whether that be talking in schools for diversity role models, lots and lots of board positions for different charities, all in the diversity field, Transmedia Watch, and the Race Equality First here in Cardiff, are the two major ones that I'm on the board of. There's another one, but I can't tell you about it yet because it's embargoed until the AGM. But I do an awful lot of work in the diversity field, and my employer is more than happy to have that sort of a person working for them.
So you've mentioned their diversity role models. Tell me a little bit about that.
Diversity role models, it's very close to my heart. It's a charity I'm not on the board of, funnily enough, but I'm a facilitator for them. I started out as a role model. We go into schools as a team of 3, 1 facilitator and 2 role models. The role models are there mainly to tell their own story, a potted version of their story in about 10 minutes. A little bit of flexibility needed there because we do our presentation, our workshop in 1 school period. We'll normally do it half a dozen times in the day so that we talk to a whole school year over the course of a school day. We have 2 role models, so we've got 2 role model stories. We've got all sorts of little games. We're just actually revising that so that we can do them online. But a typical game that we play is one where we have a PowerPoint slide up with 3 facts about each person present, the 2 role models and the facilitator. And my facts typically might be, has taught people to scuba dive with sharks, or flies Boeing jumbo jets for a living, and is pansexual. We always include at least one sexuality in the matrix of 9 facts. And the idea is that the kids then decide who is which person, the person A, person B, person C, and who does each column of facts pertain to. And of course, what we're asking them to do is stereotype us, to judge us based on no facts whatsoever, but just how we look and how we appear as we move around the classroom with them. So, that's a real icebreaker that we do. We get them to talk about language that they may either use or hear in school, mostly things like "that's so gay," where we just try and deconstruct that so that they realize that what they're actually saying is "that's rubbish," and therefore they're equating gay with rubbish in people's minds. And how do they think that makes people who may be questioning their own sexuality, maybe don't even realize whether they're gay or straight or bi or pansexual or whatever, but they may be thinking about it, they may be questioning it. And if they associate gay with being rubbish, then it really does put them in a very invidious position. And we just basically for 40 minutes to an hour, we cover the whole field. And
Is this in Wales or across the country?
No, this is UK-wide. In fact, Wales is a bit of an area where we haven't covered yet, because we would probably have to be able to provide the service in Welsh. If anybody is a suitable candidate for a role model in Welsh, we'd be more than happy to hear from them. But I'm very keen to set it up in Wales, because obviously I am Welsh. I come from the Vale of Glamorgan area, just west of Cardiff. And yeah, I'd love to be able to do it here in Wales. I've travelled to Newcastle to do this. I've done an awful lot in London. Marlborough School seems to have been my specialty for the last year, Marlborough College rather. But I've done it in Birmingham and Bristol and Liverpool and all over the country, really.
And this is all charitable stuff that's done for free to the schools, yeah?
Oh, absolutely, volunteer work, yeah.
Yeah. So your other love is, I see, is Race Equality First, which is a Welsh charitable organisation, isn't it?
Yeah, it started out as the Race Equality Council for Cardiff and South East Wales many years ago. It rebranded itself 10 or 12 years ago to Race Equality First. I've been on the board for just over 5 years now, just coming up to the end of my last term, and I'm very pleased to say that at the last AGM I was confirmed as chair. I've been chair pro tem previously, when the previous chair had to resign for family reasons. So I covered about 6 months in role then, but now I'm confirmed as the actual chair for this current year. So
it might seem a little bit confusing, because Race Equality First is not just about race equality then, is it?
No, it's not. It covers all of the protected characteristics, and I embody 5 of them myself. So, yeah, they've got no issues whatsoever with me having me on the board or as chair. And in fact, my role on most boards I'm on is that I'm really good at thinking outside the box. And, you know, if we've got a particular problem and, you know, something that we need to change about an organisation, very often I'll come up with a completely off-the-wall idea. We'll kick it around for 10 minutes and we'll find out it really is our solution. It seems to be my specialty.
Oh, excellent.
But yeah, Race Equality First in Cardiff does a terrific job. We do actually offer lots of services, again, countrywide. Lots of advocacy work that we do. We offer countrywide. But our core business is here in South East Wales, and we are pretty much all over Wales in various roles now, either as a lead or as a partner organisation in North Wales and West Wales, as well as South East Wales.
So what's the primary goal of race equality? What's it actually setting out to achieve?
Sorry, Ricky, you broke up then. Could you?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So what's the goal of Race Equality First? What are you setting out to achieve? We've got a bad connection there for a second.
I'm just going to try and make sure nobody else is using the internet for large amounts of data at the moment, because I'm getting a very poor signal, Sammy.
Yeah, I'm just making sure I've shut everything down that needs to be shut down.
Right, I've got you back clear and proper now. Sorry, could you say that question again, Ricky? Apologies.
I'm just interested in what Race Equality First is doing. What's its sort of mission in life?
Well, we run all sorts of project work. We've got core offices here in Cardiff. We run things like a minority ethnic elders group, who it's everything from very, very gentle physical fitness work with them. We have lots of advocacy work for people that have suffered hate crimes. We're a reporting point for hate crimes within the Welsh area. We cover things like awareness raising in schools. We have an annual either calendar or poster competition with primary schools across Wales. with prizes for that. I mean, for the most part, it's awareness and advocacy work.
Okay. So are you delivering training or?
Yes, we do. Yeah. At the moment, we're not delivering very much because of lockdown. We are looking at ways that we can do that electronically, obviously now. But we're finding that less than 50% of our potential clients want to proceed if it's over Zoom or something. They want it face to face. But yeah, we're hoping that we will start.
That's interesting. So less than 50% want it, will do it if it's virtual.
Yeah.
I mean, I have seen obviously a quite significant increase in the number of people who are acknowledging that they need to handle things online. And I think the problem is that, looking at what's happening right now, I can't see meetings getting back into full swing again I'd be surprised if we start seeing meetings the way we saw them before 2022 myself. I can't see
I think you're right as well.
I mean,
I'd say we're working hard towards getting it an online presence in terms of training, but it is hard sell to the customers. They don't think they're going to get the same thing by doing it over Zoom, even though most schools are pretty much delivering over Zoom exclusively, or have been through the entire lockdown. They're still not quite convinced that external speakers are going to present into their school with the same value as they would have done in person.
I think people will eventually get it, but I was quite shocked to see how few schools seem to keep regular lessons up when the capability of doing that was so effective. I mean, basically schools get pretty much free access to Zoom and various other technology platforms. Most of the technology platforms are being very supportive of education and such like. But I just didn't see kids doing stuff online, didn't hear about it happening. But I think we have to get used to it. I attended somebody else's transgender awareness training recently online, and they were actually quite good because in this 1 hour presentation, there were a few little techniques and things that they were using for engagement that I didn't know about. And I'm now looking and thinking, well, I need to be thinking a lot more creatively. And as you were saying, thinking out of the box. We've got to look at these platforms and think, well, how can I make this platform just a little bit better? And how can I do things in a way that might actually create... This is the reason I'm doing this 30-day challenge for myself, is I'm just getting used to how can I handle things a bit better. And I'm doing a variety of different things, some of which are working, some of which are not, to try and get there. And I think as speakers, we're all going to have to master not just one or two platforms, but we've actually going to have to be very good across the board of platforms. And I think that our clients are actually going to expect us to help them out, because we will have that knowledge and skill because we're doing it almost daily now. And I just seem to be constantly at meetings which I wouldn't have attended had I had to physically go there. That's the thing that's happening. I've got involved with the Liberal Democrats again because I can attend meetings for an hour and then it's just an hour. It isn't an hour.
No travel time, no nothing.
Yeah, it's quick. It's done. And so I've still got schools saying, "Can you?"
I'm on the ITV Wales diversity panel, and I represented Wales at the nationwide ITV diversity panel last month. Right. And again, it was a Zoom presence. It was very, very easy and simple to attend. For things like that, I'm not sure we're ever going to go back to where we were. I suspect that meetings where delegates are coming from a wide range of locations, it's just so convenient to do that over Zoom.
A friend of mine years and years ago, right back in my early days in speaking in the 80s, He was charging a fee which I thought was astronomical at the time. He just got a deal, and I said, "How much are you getting paid for that?" He said, £5,000. I said, "What?" There weren't speakers back then. I said, "How did you get that?" He said, "Well, I said to the guy who's booking me, I said, everybody coming from all over the country?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How much are their average expenses?" He said, "Well, it's quite a lot. It's about £150 per head by the time we take their travel and the overnight accommodation and everything else." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it for a £5 a head." And there was 1,000 people coming, and I thought, wow, what a way to sell that. It's just like, it's going to cost you £135, £150 per head just to get them there, and now it's going to cost you just an extra £5 to make sure there's something worth listening when they arrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he got the £5. I thought, wow, that really just puts it into context, doesn't it? Because it is so expensive to bring people to meetings, and yet now I've got people asking me to speak in America, speak in Europe, speak in all sorts of places. That would never have happened without this. And are you going to the PSA convention week after next at all?
No, I wasn't planning to. No, I've got so much work on at the moment. But
it's like every day
to fit in anything else.
No, you mean, but it's every single. I just give £100 for somebody who's not a PSA member. I think it's about 80 if you are. Every single day there is something on, something in the evening, lunchtime sessions, and then the whole weekend. I thought, what an amazing bargain! That's way, way cheaper than going to the convention, which was normally about £300-400 plus all of your costs for being there. I thought, I can't miss this. It's going to be brilliant. And I've been to one fellows event, which was so good and run so well. I think a lot of people will learn, if they go to the PSA convention, will learn how to put on an online event that really, really works. Because I think we've got a lot of very talented people who've now been doing it for 6 months, or some for a lot longer. Alan Stevens has been doing this for 5 years. And I think we're going to be able to showcase how to make online events work. Let me switch to Transmedia Watch, because I've been really impressed with what Transmedia Watch have done in the past few years. Because I remember back 10 years ago, Channel 4 were absolutely appalling, constantly getting genders wrong on their programs. The press were absolutely ripping us to pieces. It then got all quite good. I mean, Transmedia Watch did such a good job, and then 2015, since 2015, the last 5 years, it has just become really horrible again. So how is this whole sort of anti-trans thing that suddenly picked up again, and the whole government sort of negative shift? How is that viewed by Transmedia Watch, do you think?
With horror, to be honest. Our biggest battle at the moment is with the BBC, who are, or at least appear to be, transphobic to the core. I mean, some of their headline programs, especially on Radio 4, are presented by transphobic presenters and very often have transphobic items on. They claim that what they are doing is the usual BBC claim of a balanced reporting. But in fact, of course, what they're doing is balancing views which are downright hostile with people that are just trying to live their lives in peace. That's not balanced. That's very definitely pointed. And we would love to get the BBC to come and sit down and talk to us. Transmedia Watch has no teeth. It's not a police organisation. It's entirely an educational organisation.
Yeah.
It gives program makers or journalists advice on language, how their language can be supportive, how their language can be neutral, how their language can be hostile without being downright rude or offensive. We're not there to say you can't say this. We're there to say you can say what you like, but you might like to think about saying it this way. Yeah, we would love to get back to a state where we were a few years ago, but of course, the gender recognition debate has derailed most things trans in this country for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, the shame is that there's always been a negative campaign in the States, and it looks as if what's happened is the anti-trans campaign in the UK just purloined all of the American anti-trans material and started pushing it over here.
Well, the thing is, I mean, they purloined the anti-trans material, but they are largely funded in the same ways. They're being funded by the fundamentalist Christian right and also by extreme right-wing organizations. And, that applies in the States. And unfortunately, it applies to all these organizations here. If you actually look and see who some of the major transphobic organizations in Britain are in bed with, who they are supporting and claiming support from, some of them are the most horrific far-right organizations you can imagine. I can't see how anybody who tries to purloin the name feminist can align themselves with some of these far-right organizations, but they do.
It is so odd, isn't it? Because these organizations, I first came across this when I changed gender. One of the first things, my business came to a standstill overnight. I just stopped getting booked, and that was the end of it. And I had to completely switch careers. So I'd moved up to Hull, which is where my family came from, but I'd never been up here. So I came up to Hull, stayed with some friends, decided as Hull University had a really good gender studies department, I'd go to university and do a master's degree in gender, which I did. And of course, as soon as I got into this course, I came across people who were very opposed to trans people. And the first year doing the course, I attended an International Women's Day event, which I thought would, now living as a woman would be fine. Now arrived at the door and was told, "I'm sorry, no, we don't. We decided not to allow trans women to attend this because you're not real women." And these were actually people who, one day would be my friends, but the next day, if it was anything to do with women's rights, immediately it was no, you're not allowed here. You're not really a woman. So I saw that. So, and of course, when I studied my degree, I read stuff by Germaine Greer and Janice Raymond and all this sort of cohort of anti-trans feminists have been around for a long, long time, but their voices were quite small. It seems that suddenly what happened was this transgender trend, which was largely seemed to be made up of parents of children who wanted to transition, who were trying to stop them, and decided by getting together, they could, really bring it to a halt. And then, as you say, the influence of the Americans is just, I discovered that those same American groups were also funding the campaign to get homosexuality made a capital offense in Uganda and things like that. They are pretty horrible.
Well, exactly that. I think what they're doing, their agenda is far more than destroy the lives of transgender people. Their agenda is, first of all, they don't want transgender people to exist, but we're the weak target by comparison with the most privileged of the LGBT spectrum, which, let's face it, is white, cisgender, gay male.
Yes.
Those are now so safely past their fight and their woes that they think they are safe. But they're the ultimate target, let's face it. Gay marriage, things like that, they're all on the agenda for these right-wing groups. And they think that if they can get their foot in the door by winning a battle to destroy transgender lives, that they can carry the battle then on with momentum to destroy gay lives.
And yet, see, I have this passion for LGBT history. So I know that when the whole Stonewall thing kicked off in 1969, the following year there was the St. Christopher Street march.
Hi, Marsha.
that march took place. But then what happened after that was that all of a sudden Sylvia Rivera, Marsha Hunt, and everybody else were shoved out. And in Canada in 1972, in Toronto, they banned drag queens and trans women from marching in the parade because they were trying to present this program of being, we're all perfectly straight heterosexual. But then I look back at Magnus Hirschfeld in 1910 when he set things up, and when the whole campaign against paragraph 175, and I found exactly the same thing was happening. 100 years ago, the gay campaign was trying to get rid of the weird groups. The men who dressed as women, the women who dressed as men, they were the ones that were making it hard for them to say, we're just ordinary people, just with a different sexuality. So it's these things just keep coming around and around again.
And of course, elements within the transgender community have been just as guilty of that. If you think back to the Beaumont Society, it was all about don't frighten the wives. We're perfectly straight men. We smoke pipes, we drink beer. We just happen to have a frock on.
Not the Beaumont Society meeting I went to.
But I mean, so much of the Beaumont Society ethos don't frighten the wives.
They were all bisexual. I got more people made passes at me at Beaumont Society meetings than anywhere at all.
Mustn't say that. You'll frighten the wives, honey.
Yeah, no. That was all part of the cover, isn't it? It was all part of saying it's just cross-dressing, just a little hobby. And no, you can't.
Yeah.
Still, I think the other group that's getting a lot of flack now, of course, people are coming out non-binary, and I'm increasingly towards identifying as non-binary because I find myself somewhere in between.
Ricky, most of us probably went through at least a short spell of being non-binary.
Yeah.
One way of being non-binary is to be the dual role transvestite, the dual role cross-dresser.
Yeah.
For me, it was a case of I had to go to work as him, and I was coming home and being me. And I know that sounds schizophrenic. I'm not meaning that him is somebody different. They both were me. But shorthand, it's a lot easier to say than, when I was going to work, I was having to present as male, and when I was coming home, I was able to present as the real me, the cat. But that's dual role. That is, by definition, non-binary. My identity was becoming far and away firmly entrenched as cat, but I was having to present as the old me, and that is almost by definition non-binary. There are plenty of other ways you can be non-binary. You can be androgynous. You can be, presenting as neither. You can present as one gender one day and another gender another day. You can present as one gender but not identify as that gender. There's a difference between identity and presentation. There's all sorts of different ways people can be non-traditional in their gender identities, their gender roles, and their gender presentations.
I don't know if
that's why the latest research seems to suggest that for every one person who's binary transgender, there are 4 who are non-binary.
Absolutely.
And that makes the total non-binary population in the UK, once everybody's shaken it out and stop pretending they're not and stop feeling they have to hide it from society, once we're all allowed to be ourselves, something like 5% of the UK population are going to be in some way, shape or form non-traditional in their gender identity, role or presentation.
I think it could be higher than that.
That's an astonishing number of people, 1 in 20.
Yeah. I think it actually could be higher than that. We could be talking 10% of the population. Once we overcome the fear, because there is this huge fear, isn't there, of, oh my God, what will people think if I? And yet, no, I think we will start to see this grow and grow,
and that's why we've seen such an explosion in. That's why we've seen such an explosion in young people. Is that all of a sudden they don't feel frightened to go along to the JID service in the Tavistock. They're not frightened of it. Therefore, they presented in ever increasing numbers. 2,500 last year.
See, that's not a big number.
The reason being that they're no longer frightened to do it. No,
people say, "Oh, this is a big, huge increase from the 50." Well, one a week was quite small because actually they didn't do anything. They wouldn't help anybody.
Yeah, they were, people were too frightened to do it anyway. once the fear elements come off, then it's gone through the roof for them. But it's still a very small number compared to the actual population.
Yeah.
And there's no trend about it. Transgender trend is just such a nonsense. There's nothing trendy about being transgender. Nobody do it just because it's fashionable. You do it because it's you.
No, you're right. Nobody would do it for fun.
For me, weaponizing kids is so tragic. I mean, when you think, I've got a really good friend, and she transitioned young. She wasn't given blockers very quickly when she went along to the Tavistock. So she went through the first flushes of puberty in the wrong gender. And of course, the testosterone causes irreversible damages to skeletal structure, things like a brow ridge. She wasn't too late in getting blockers, so there weren't very many gross changes that happened to her. Her voice never broke. She never got hairy, but she did need some skeletal changes when she eventually transitioned and had to have facial surgery. That could have been avoided simply by giving her blockers a little bit earlier. It's tragic that these kids aren't dealt with the minute they're discovered, because everything you do early prevents a lifetime of difficulty for that person. Everything that can be done early on is reversible anyway.
I think people don't really get. The big argument I'm seeing, and I don't have any facts about it, is that almost everyone who goes on to blockers actually then goes on to cross-gender hormone and surgery. I don't know the truth facts about that, but what's fairly clear, I think everybody seems to think you just go to the clinic and that's it, you're on hormones. There is a few private people there have been a few issues where it appears as if people were put onto hormones more quickly.
There were one particular sequence of doctors in private clinic, and they were using particularly blockers and cross-gender hormones, but particularly blockers as a diagnostic tool. If you give somebody who is a fetishistic cross-dresser, and to be honest, I still include them as part of the transgender spectrum.
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely anti-elitist. Nobody is not trans enough as far as I'm concerned. But if you give somebody whose transgender includes a very strong sexual element, if you give them testosterone blockers, they will lose their sexual urge, their sexual potency, their sexual capability. They won't be able to get an erection. They won't be able to feel sexually gratified by their dressing. Now, if they are genuinely dysphoric, then the sexual element is not important. For those of us who identify in our role, I couldn't care less whether or not I have a sex life. I'm me, and that's all that matters. But for somebody whose cross-dressing is motivated by sexual gratification, the blockers immediately tell them, I can't do this. And those that were put on those early and had that sexual motivation came back off almost immediately, within 6 to 8 weeks, as they realized that they were going limp, to not to put too fine a point on it. They suddenly said, well, no, okay, I can't do this. I'm coming off them. And it was a supremely easy diagnostic tool. So there was a lot of validity in people, in this particular chain of doctors in one clinic, which were using it, not in a way that had never been heard of anywhere in the world, in a way that was perfectly well recognized in other countries, but wasn't in line with the policies of the establishment in the gender clinics here in the UK. So they were using techniques that came from the States. Well, I wasn't going to name names, but in fact, one particular clinician in Charing Cross Hospital. Again, I won't name names. Using it as a diagnostic tool is a perfectly valid use for testosterone blockers. They're completely reversible. You give these people, that had a sexual element, testosterone blockers for 6 to 8 weeks. They realize that the sexual element is now gone completely, and either they will carry on because they are genuinely gender dysphoric, or they will come back off them because the fetishistic element was what was driving the whole thing in the first place. So it was a valid American technique, but it wasn't one that was approved of by Charing Cross, as you said. And therefore, Charing Cross started taking them to the GMC and getting them suspended. And that happened to a succession of doctors. All of them were doing a really good job, I thought.
He was the first doctor I went to see, and he helped me enormously when I needed that help. So, sorry, his name's gone now. It was, sorry, doesn't matter.
You're thinking of Uncle Russ?
Yes, yes. Badly treated, really, really horrible the way he was treated.
Are you thinking of Uncle Russell?
Yes.
A lovely man.
Great.
And
really
his
great.
successor was Ricky Curtis, and exactly the same thing happened.
Yeah, so many. Kat, it's been really, really great talking to you. Just hold on a second while I close off, and we can have a quick chat. I'm just going to shut down and just briefly talk about what's happening tomorrow. So thank you very much indeed, Kat. And so there we are. We're now going to be talking tomorrow. I've got another guest on. Don't forget, just pop down and have a look at the bottom. You'll see a link to my non-binary and trans inclusion training on October 20th. And you can pay whatever what you can afford to attend that training, recommending a minimum of £20. But come along, because it's a really good training to help you understand a lot more about trans and non-binary and how to make your workplace much more trans and non-binary inclusive. My guest tomorrow is Natalie Paris, who's a Geordie French storyteller. So we're going to be looking now. She's got a particular thing about books that are gender stereotypical. And so she's one of these people who speaks about gender issues, but it's going to be more about the issues around just gender stereotyping. So join me tomorrow at 4 p.m. And I look forward to seeing you again then. For now, have a good evening. See you tomorrow.